Just a heads up, I'm gonna be presenting everything on my desktop. So there's gonna be some moments where we're gonna have some movement in the screen. Hope it's not too much of a distraction. Just let me start timing myself, and then we can start. Okay. Well, hello everyone. My name is Raúl Aguilar. As you can tell, I'm finishing my MFA here at VCU. And I'm from Mexico. And I also lived for a long time actually, in Montreal, in Canada. And I basically moved to the US to do my graduate studies. So this is me with a filter crying. And this is my show, Straight Through My Heart. And it opened last Friday, and it's gonna be there until next week. In this presentation, I'm gonna talk as organized as possible about my personal interests, about myself, about the research that I've been doing here in the last 2 years, and about the body of work that I did also in the last 2 years, with a special emphasis on the work that I did on my thesis. This is my dog Lula, and there's a history of like making shows and putting my dogs into the publicities. I think you're gonna see through my interest that I like to read about labor and work, and sometimes I like to think about like what's going to be the future of work, and I like to think a lot about dogs and how like dogs kind of deviated from a function of like being like the kind of animals that were taking care of like facilities or all this stuff, and how domestic dogs end up being just like their primary role is just like being care of and being loved and giving love back. And that's something that I'm looking forward in life, just or maybe in the next life, to wake up as a dog. And yeah, I wanted to start this presentation with this drawing that I did when I was like 7 or something like that. Just because like a couple of weeks ago, while I was writing my thesis, I was talking with my partner, and we're talking about like how we always tell the same story over and over. And I got fixated with that because I feel like through my work as an artist, I've been trying to say all the time the same over and over. And this image, I thought it was very cute because it has like this aesthetic choices that I did when I was a kid, like this yin and yang being stabbed by this kind of like spear and throwing blood everywhere. And like some of those aesthetic choices, I feel like they're still in the work that I do. And I don't know, I think like they're part of the stories that we tell over and over. And the other thing is just like, this is a letter to my parents in which I was telling them that I was planning to be a good boy, and I was going to practice and study as much as I could, and I was going to be the best that year. And so yeah. So part of my interest in work and like in art is being like exploring this concept of labor and kind of like my position as an artist and as a worker in the world and in the culture of like neoliberalism. So basically, like, what does it mean to be a worker today? And one of the first shows I did under this rubric was like 2018 in the Tab Gallery in Montreal that is run by my friend Reese Wilson. And this show, I did it in collaboration with my partner Marcela. And there's like our other dog, Chino, dressed as an office worker and just being ready to go to work. And I just put 2 paintings of that show because like I have a lot of images to show. So in these 2 paintings, I was kind of like exploring the idea of like what are the pressures to perform that happen as like collateral of like culture and neoliberalism, and basically like how we're always like on a race to become more employable, or like we're constantly kind of like fighting between each other and competing between each other to become like the most employable subject, and how that just was a sort of like cage for the self. And the other thing that I was interested at that time, it was just like how the role of an artist was being absorbed by other kind of like jobs. So basically like have office jobs were starting to look more like as artist jobs. And they're thinking a lot about like how kind of employment is asking more and more of like your creativity, your free time, your personality, your like how well you keep your body, and all of those kind of like elements that traditionally were outside of labor. And then after that, I moved to Mexico. Like that show was in Montreal. After that, I moved to Mexico City, where I started kind of like, I didn't have a studio at the time. And I started experimenting with this thing that now I'm calling like kind of affective techniques or affective strategies in painting. And at the time, I didn't call them like that. At the time, I was just feeling very depressed and I didn't have a studio. So I bought ink and a nib, and I started making these drawings in which I would make these little dots. And through the dots, I would start kind of like constructing like the whole image. So you can tell like this is a collection of like dots, dots after dots. And each one of these drawings took me like 3 weeks or 4 weeks to do. And when I started, I was just like free handing them, like free drawing them basically. But after a while, I started using a splint because I hurt my hand by doing them. And at the time, I was just very depressed and also very angry. And I guess that's where this idea of like effective techniques or effective strategies come to. Because like, I think like the point and like just like the obsessive way of like working these pieces was a way of like working through that anger and working through that depression. And just like by giving yourself a job or by giving yourself like some labor or like a goal to achieve. The funny thing is like, not funny, but like the thing is like, you never really like accomplish any sort of like resolution through labor. Well, at least I don't. Like I was still depressed. And the other thing is just like repeating these things that make you angry, like in the long run. It doesn't come for like proper resolution. It's just like you just keep affecting yourself in a similar manner. So I did 6 of them in a couple of months. And they're all kind of like little writings that I was doing, and also just like repetition of some phrases that I was writing. And they're all of them like a little bit absurd, but also, like I say, just very angry, just like with like, I don't want to work, but I have to work, or like I feel all this guilt about like the kind of life that I'm taking, or like the lifestyle that I'm taking. Or just like being an artist, like what does it mean to be an artist? Like what is the things that you do most of the time? Like, are you just like criticizing all the time other people, or like that kind of stuff? And I also thought that I was like channeling this very teenager spirit of like feeling a lack of something. In Spanish, teenager is adolescente, which comes from adolecer, which is like to lack something. So being always in a constant state of lacking something. So I felt like these drawings were kind of like a way of like trying to complete that something that I was lacking, but never being able to really fulfill it. Yeah. So then I moved to Virginia, and this is like the body of work that I've been doing in the last couple of years, and this is kind of like the research that I've been making the last 2 years, which is about heartbreak. So having spoken a little bit about like labor and like the condition of labor today, one of the things that I got very fixated is by this kind of like constant state of like depression in which I felt, and that I could recognize in other people, of like feeling like there's no possibility of getting like a better lifestyle to your work, and especially also as an artist feeling like all the cool or like nice artist jobs are very badly paid. And so I was trying to relate with this concept of like depression, and I came up with this idea of heartbreak, of like feeling as similar as if like I just broke up with the love of my life, and just like feeling like there's no future, and feeling like extremely vulnerable, and like feeling like I'm mourning a part of myself that has never been there, right? Or feeling like disappointment for something that will never come, but at the same time being fed by a desire to have stuff and a desire to have like a proper life. So I made this concept map, sort of, in which like I was trying to like explain myself what does heartbreak means, and through this, or like through this attempt of writing about heartbreak, I went into like a research, not research, like reading a lot of like literature around it, and I was very into like Sarah Ahmed and this book Cultural Politics of Emotions, in which she's kind of like exploring this idea of like are emotions something that come from us, like is innate to the human before we socialize? So anger comes from inside, or emotions are things that are happening in the environment and we absorb them, right? So for example, I really like this way of thinking about it. It's just like, I get angry when someone arrives late, and that anger comes from myself, from my personality, and from like my subjectivity. I cannot tolerate anyone to be late. Or that anger is nurtured by a culture that does not appreciate like being late. That would be like the opposite. That would be like the emotion being constructed outside and then being internalized. I was also like very obsessed, and like this is one of the books that I've read the most in the last kind of 5-7 years, like no 5 years, The Soul at Work by Franco Bifo Berardi, in which he just talks about like this, how, you know, like a way to like say it in a few words is like how we transition from like factory work to office work, from like going to work to bringing our work with ourselves in our pockets in the cell phone. So basically just like never have a moment of rest. And that shows in the way like that we are always promoting ourselves online, and the way I think I mentioned earlier as well, like the way like whenever we find jobs, they start taking into consideration a lot more things that the things that we're doing there. Things like the way we conduct in our outside lives, things like our creativity or ideas, like how much of ourselves can we give to a company or to a place. And lately, like Anne Chekovic, Depression as a Public Feeling, this has been a very inspiring book to kind of like start understanding like depression not as a problem of the self or the individual, but as a collective problem. There's like in the history of like depression, there's like two strains that I've recognized, and one of them is like the medical one, and the other one is like the psychoanalytical one. And for the medical one, depression is a cause of like lacking certain like chemistry in the brain and maybe some like sociability. And for psychoanalysis is like this concept of like melancholia, of like the self attaching toward like a love object and not being able to release it whenever this love object goes. But both of this kind of like approaches have like the self as the center stage of the problem of depression. So they do not recognize like any external factor as like the motor of like being depressed or depression. And some of the things that are in this book is basically talking about those things. And I think like through my work, I've been trying to talk about those things as well and explore those things in my work. So basically, this is a little diagram I did where I was like trying to say like, is depression coming from my body to the outside, or is depression something that I'm absorbing from an outside and just like internalizing it? So yeah, this is the first body of work that I did in Richmond. These are like the t-shirt paintings, and I started using like the t-shirt substrate as a way to identify like the painting with the body, especially with the torso, with the area where our more vital organs are and where our heart is. And something that I was interested about this material is like the absorbing qualities that it presents. So the way I would do these paintings is basically like cut an old t-shirt I have and start dyeing it. And this is the first time I started using dyes instead of painting, or at least as a first stage of painting. And then I would hang them on screws, and I start applying layers of like glue into it, transparent glue, pH neutral glue, and let them hang basically. And then, so you can see I have like 10 of them. And after like this first layers and letting the material just like be affected by the gravity and just like kind of holding the memory of the treatment that I was giving it, I start painting on top of them with oil. And the paintings that I was doing on them were kind of like attempts as describing a feeling through drawing, describing different stages of a feeling through drawing. And all of them kind of around this kind of idea of like heartbreak, like different stages of heartbreak, or different moments, or different iterations, or different ways in which I could try to explain it through images. At the same time, I was again using a language that I would relate a lot with teenagehood, which was this kind of like cartoony characters, a little bit absurd, a little bit funny also, but also just as serious as sometimes sadness could be. So again, I have like 10 of them. I really like this one because like this one, I find it very hard, very easy to explain how absurd sometimes the feeling was. One day I was just walking around and thinking about like, oh my God, sometimes you feel like you live your life through in a body, but not also in a body, but in a self that feels so different that the way you think about yourself. And I was thinking about this frog going through this thing and then suddenly dying. And whenever this frog died, it would come as a ghost and realize it was always a rhinoceros. And like that was kind of like the constraint in its body, and that was like the uncomfortableness of the thing. So that was one of the iterations of like how heartbreak operates, or how heartbreak could feel like a constraint in the body. Yeah, the other thing that I consider part of like this effective strategies was like the lack of a structure. Like these are paintings. Usually paintings are like held by this kind of wood or aluminum stretchers, and that's what gives them their kind of strength. And in these paintings, they don't have a stretcher, they don't have a holder. So like they're very delicate. So a big part of making these paintings was taking care of the paintings. So cleaning them often, like not moving them that much, because sometimes you move them and they start kind of like breaking. So I started thinking about like these paintings not only as I'm painting them, but also I'm taking care of them. Something that I start liking a lot, the idea of like just taking care of something. And the way like this project kind of culminated with the help of my partner Marcela and Alfonso, a teacher and the Sacred Heart Community Center, was to bring like the t-shirt paintings workshop into this community center. So this community center is for like Latino teenagers, and they have like this art school in the summer, and not only in the summer, but it's called Casa Lapis. And so they invited me to give a workshop, and the way we did it, we went there outside in the midst of COVID, And we start talking about heartbreak and how heartbreak felt. And we start trying to create images to try to visualize how heartbreak felt. So sometimes it was a heart with a knife on it. Sometimes it was like some flowers that are dying. This one that is very nice is like a volcano that's sleeping, like an eye that is crying, like a devil Cupid, a melting eyes, all these kind of like metaphors towards like heartbreak. And something that happened, and I thought some of like, for me, one of the learning aspects of this experience was like, we did the t-shirts and we were like, it was fun to do them. And while we were doing them, we were so open about being hurt and about being sad that a lot of conversations were prompted through there that were touching not only kind of like personal aspects of life, but like political aspects of life. So a lot of them start talking about like their conditions as migrants here, and like missing home, not liking living in the US. And in general, I felt like through the project, we opened space where we were able to talk about these things, and it just felt good. I like for a second when I was doing the t-shirt paintings and all this work about heartbreak, sometimes I felt I was just hurting myself by putting myself in a position where I was just like reminding me about the sad things that I had in life. But like this felt completely the opposite. It felt good. It felt like it was nice to have like a moment to kind of share with other people. Uh, and that, with that in mind, I'm gonna start a video, and we're gonna go to my thesis exhibition. So my thesis exhibition is called Straight to My Heart, and it's basically three main pieces. There's this prints on the wall that are vibrating and making this hum sound that you can listen.
Raúl, just quickly, it's hard to hear you talking over it, so maybe if you turn the sound down a little bit.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Noah.
Sure.
So like I was saying, like these are prints on the wall, and they're vibrating, and the vibration is making that sound that is not letting you hear my voice. There are 10 of those prints, and I'm gonna talk a little bit more about them as soon as like the video finish. And the other part of like the installation is this large fabric piece that is hanging from the ceiling. And that is a piece that comes from a project I did with the help of like my mother and my friend Hane and Ellen and my partner Marcela. And this is in the middle of the exhibition space, and it's like almost like a cocoon shaped thing in the middle of this vibrating kind of like pieces. And you can go in, and sometimes when people walk around, like these bells move and they make their own sound. And a sound that I like to think that interrupts a little bit, like the hum that is happening outside. And this prints on the wall, they're all connected to the same power source. And so with one button, they all come to life. And yeah, I'm gonna maybe move a little bit fast. Oh, okay. And then, yeah, there's this last piece, which is like it's like a schematics of my thesis, basically. And I'm gonna put the sound up. Okay, it stopped. It's okay. It's snoring. We're gonna have a second video of this in a second. So yeah, this is how the thesis looks, and that's how it feels when you walk around. So I was mentioning this fabric piece. My partner Marcel helped me dyeing it. Again, similar painting strategy that the t-shirt paintings, the dyeing, because like it's absorbed by the fabric and it penetrates the fabric and is held by the fabric. The colors, I try to make it colorful because in the conversation that I had with my mom when I was working with this piece, we talk about it, try to make it colorful and happy versus just very sad. This is like one of the nights that we spend dyeing it, and you can see we're watching Bob's Burgers. And then once this fabric was dyed and stitched together with the help of Hane, we hang 100 bells inside of this kind of U-shaped room, fabric room. And in the middle of it, there's this embroidery. The one on the left, it was done by my mother, and the one on the right, it was done by myself. The way we did it is we met every Tuesday since January, and the first meetings we just start talking about like depression and sadness and our different experiences with this feeling. And after that, we start writing together, like trying to put into words how this thing felt. And we created this one-page document that then in another meeting, we start cutting down to have like just a couple of phrases. And after that, whenever we each one of us had our own writing, my mom started teaching me how to embroider it into the fabric. And then she shipped it from Mexico, and I stitched it together with the help of, I didn't stitch, Ellen stitched it. So yeah, my mom says, feelings out of control, like feelings that are out of your control, sadness, anxiety with no reason, nothing is perfect, reason and emotion, just let it go and accept the past. Mine says, I don't sleep, I'm tired, I need affection, other stimulation and noise, dermatitis and acid, stomach acid. It feels that I only work, but I also feel. I want to take care of yourself, and I want to take care of myself forever. I love you a lot. And this piece kind of like was in direct contrast with the piece that was outside. Yeah, the piece that was outside is not made by hand. It's all printed on this metal structure with this Arduino card, making it move and vibrate. And the idea of like vibration came from a writing that I did when I was trying again to describe this feeling of heartbreak. And I put these two characters into a discussion, and one of them was saying like that heartbreak was like an echo at the end of a tunnel. The other character was saying like the echo of a vortex where thousands of tunnels meet, big sound, paralyzed, no trusting my own desire because they don't feel mine. I mean, they are mine, but they're also adopted from somewhere else. I know I cannot shake away this sense of inadequacy. I'm improvising half of the time, the other half I'm just being driven as a flesh computer. There are so many ways in which we can describe this alienation, but still feels concealed. Didn't we say something about the noise? Yeah, a whistle, an almost imperceptible resonance, a pitch. So I was thinking about like the vibration as like this thing that is always there and you can get used to it, but it just really affects you. And the kind of images that I was making was very inspired by just like digital works. Like all of them, I did them in Photoshop. The writing came from like different companies and like country leaders in which they were talking about like different things or different ways of like controlling and like performing a certain amount of care through the speech, but in reality just like promoting a lifestyle that is just very intense and just like pressuring for performance, for example, or like hyper stimulation or just like feeling lonely. And there were just like collages where I used a lot of transparency. So all these things were colliding sort of in the same image. And on the back, there's always this figure, teenage figure from Neon Genesis Evangelion, which is like the ultimate emotional manipulation anime that you can find. And yeah, I was very inspired by this kind of like rave flyers and like this way of like making images that are just like It's very like kind of badly done, and just like with very limited digital tools, and just with a specific aesthetic that at the time of the flyers, this was not thought as beautiful as much as it was just like experimenting with a type of image making that feels like cheap, because it's like the first time you have access to these things and you have a bunch of possibilities of how to construct images. So it was also very hopeful, almost like kind of like utopian, in which like there was like an aspect of like transcendence in this flyers of like the self and the mix between self and technology into a higher being. So I was very inspired by those, and when I was making these images. And for example, like I wanted to dissect one of those images because they all have a lot of information. Again, this is like Shinji from like Neon Genesis Evangelion in the background. And then in front, we have like this machine that is supposed to be projected for the next 10 years, like an arm machine that can cook for you. And on the left, we have this character called Emma, which is like, is part of like a study in London that they did about what's going to be the future of the office worker. And you have like red eyes, hump, belly that is like inflated because of stress and acid. And I don't know, I just felt very identified about like what is the future that we're promoting and that we are accelerating towards. And this other toilet is a prototype toilet that is sold for companies, so employees don't spend that much time sitting there because it makes your legs numb. So yeah, that. So I'm almost done. How am I with time? Just 2 more minutes. And this is the final piece of the thesis. Again, this is like a concentric circles that explain the research and my thesis. So basically heartbreak emanating everywhere, the specter of capital or capitalism or neoliberalism, the way it just like kind of lurks for your soul and your labor, and how it creates conditions for hyperstimulation and competition and productivity and self-exploitation, and how that creates like these aspects of like depression, loneliness, and anxiety and fatigue, and how all of those help to create like the sad or the heartbroken subject. And in the thesis, this piece had a speaker on the back that you can hear it just snoring. So basically kind of putting my thesis to work or putting my labor into rest, thinking about like how sometimes like after all this research, some of the things that I thought it was just like, it just would be nice just to be able to sleep a little bit longer, and just like, maybe I'm sad, but just like hold that sadness. And like, that's some of the things that I came to realization with the collective project that I did with my mother. So yeah. And with this note, I'm gonna end. Thank you.
Thank you, Raúl. Maybe before we begin, there was a one question from Sylvia in the chat. I'm just asking you to say a little bit more about the prints.
Yes, for sure. So like this print, I hurry up a little bit. I saw the time slipping by and I was like, so yeah, this prints were my way of like trying to separate kind of the exhibition space into modalities, like the outside environment versus like the inside inner self. And then the outside modality, what I wanted to put is all this, like kind of this prints that stand for all these pressures that are like adjacent or collateral to capitalism. So like pressure to perform, self-exploitation, just like hyperstimulation, alienation. And because it was like this notion of the outside, I also didn't want to use my own labor to do them. And I also didn't want to, like, I mean, at the time it was my work, but not my physical work, not my sensible work. And also I didn't want to use my own speech. I wanted to use a speech of power, or like the speech that is already outside. So because of that, I just went into like thinking about like, okay, how power operates today through economy, through like political power, through like spam on your uh, email, like all these ways in which like power slips to your life. And so each one of the phrases, I was taking them, like one of them is from Alibaba, the other one is from like Amazon, the other one is like from just this one. There was the first one that I took from, it's like from Nixon, that is like make the economy scream. It just felt like a phrase that I couldn't stop thinking about it. Like it's such a double-edged phrase of like make the economy scream out of excitement, but also make the economy scream out of like just like provoke pain into them, provoke pain into the economy. And yeah, and then all these other images that I put up like around were like images that I thought it was adjacent to this message, or that again like slipped through my life in different ways. Like there's one of them, they have like this office chair that I've been having like publicity for office chairs now for like a couple of months, like because we're all in your houses. And the office chair is a way of taking care of yourself, but also is a way of exploiting you. So like there's like this dichotomy in all these images. Again, it's like a performance of care, but also like sort of like self-exploitation. Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you something, Raúl. First of all, congratulations to all three of you. It's quite an achievement, particularly after this year. But Raúl, you know that I'm going to say something about psychoanalysis. So what I thought was interesting is that the reference that you made to psychoanalysis with regard to depression is actually a rather literary take from psychoanalysis. But in fact, in terms of actual, let's say, psychoanalytic practice, depression is often seen as a veil for, and I'm bringing up these issues because you brought them up yourself. I'm not trying to psychoanalyze you. But depression is often seen as a veil for anger. And so the question that I have to move away from the couch for a second is to do with your actual work, which is, with the actual work in the show and how you chose to situate them. Because, I'm very interested in, I noticed that in all the work, there is a kind of suppressed anger, and the vibration in particular, it seems to me to be in the register of repression or suppression, right? Especially if you follow the schema that psychoanalytic theory would follow. Did you, when you decided to use, you made a decision to use vibration as opposed to something more cataclysmic, which could have referenced your earlier preoccupations in earlier work to do with rage or anger, in relation to the kind of imposition of this particular capitalist society on the body and on the labor of the body and the sentiment in the psyche. So I would like to hear more about this decision to use vibration.
Yeah, I was not relating it with anger, to be honest. I was relating it with just like anxiousness. Like I was relating it with like the inability to stop, and the way sometimes like bodies end up twitching, and in order to take some of that anxiety out. So for me, like I'm a very nervous person. I'm always moving. There's moments in my life where I had like a tick. And for me, that vibration was mostly that. Like, I understand what you're saying about anger, and I think it's definitely, I think it's hard not to feel angry and not have repressed anger. So like, I don't think it's not something that I'm running against in terms of like an interpretation, but it was not something that I was focusing that much. Like I felt like in this work I was more focusing on kind of like depression, but also just like anxiety, and especially like a like an anxiety that is permanent. It's not something that comes and goes. It's something that is just vibrating there forever. Um, so yeah, that.
I appreciated the political like stance or maneuvering that you were doing, especially with like um, doing like the layering with the anime characters as well as references to like Earth right now or like Earth as a whole with anime or that form of media as a lens for viewing it, given that Evangelion Eva is extremely political and was like made in direct relationship to like at the times contemporary like Japanese politics around like violence. And I I don't know if I have a question so much to say, but rather a statement of like appreciating how all of these things coalesce together, given that there's like a very obvious James Baldwin quote of like, to be Black in America is to be consistently in this position of rage or feeling of like extreme rage, or that's how I remember that quote, because that's how I feel. And the nervousness, the nervous conditions, the anxiety, I feel that it was really interesting looking at your work and seeing the varying degrees of transparency you allowed for those nervous conditions to manifest in visual format. And I think that they coalesced successfully, given that I could see each piece with like two or three like permutations on what it could mean. Like the snoring piece, I was thinking more along the lines of like, I'm tired of this earth, I'm tired of this space, I'm tired of, you know, these feelings altogether, while simultaneously I would like to be put to rest. And I think the only other thing that I really wanted to say was the softness of the feelings, the softness of the emotions, and the introspection that you performed for the work also had it held hands with the softness of that piece that was in the center, like the rainbow of colors, and how the community that you experienced to get to this point, to get through the production of this work, also is a medium for the work. And that's something that I was glad to hear you talk about more so, rather than like, here are the 40 different graphic design methods in which I made this, you know, which is usually what happens. But yeah, thank you for talking about your work and sharing your humanity. And thank you to everybody else also. Like, this has been a super blast. I'm not even from here. I'm just here to enjoy y'all talking about art. Good job, everybody. Like, just
Welcome. Thank you.
yeah. I'm here all night.
Hey Raúl, if I may, I'm gonna ask you a question. So,
Yeah.
congrats first for your thesis. It's awesome work. And so in the past, I'm pretty familiar with your work from the past, and I want to relate specifically your t-shirts paintings. Um, so when you're working on a concept, a concept that requires some research, such as labor and capital and capitalism and all of those social ideas, require a little bit of more guidance. And what you've done in the past is express some guidance through the paintings in terms of text and diagrams. So you remove that part of your work in the t-shirts pieces. Can you talk about that? Because you also talk about very specific feelings, right? So the decision making process of that, how that go?
Yeah, cool question. Uh, Yeah, I don't know. Like when I moved here, I was tired of like making paintings that you could just read and get. And I don't know. I guess like I was not sure what I wanted to say. Like I think now I can talk about more precise situation, but even like the story that I told about like the rhinoceros and the frog, like it's a precise narrative, but it's not a precise feeling. You know, like that doesn't tell you anything about this characters could have felt. Uh, so I think like through the work that I've been doing, and I would relate like the t-shirt paintings with the body of work that I show after, is trying to like localize that feeling and put it into words. And I think like the first attempt was like putting in into images. I feel like the beautiful thing about images is like they're very open. Like I think language can be open, but also constraints. And I think sometimes images can be so open. And I think like the attempt at the time was like making them open. Then it came up like I started feeling frustrated because I didn't feel people was getting them. And then I was like, I'll move away from this and I'll start writing a little bit more in order to maybe try to be more precise. Uh, but I think like the t-shirt paintings have enough content in the way they're made, like the substrate in which they are, like I mentioned earlier, like the process in which they died, the way they're hanged, that they're already communicating a lot of things. Maybe they're not as precise, but I don't know. I feel like there's another. It's just like an alternative of how to present your research. Yeah.
Right. That makes sense.
And thanks for the question.
I can ask you more if nobody has any have many questions.
I'm also curious. I have other questions about anime and how it relates to your like process overall. Like not just in terms of consumption as therapy, because I feel like contemporary anime and manga is like very clearly a perfect like lateral data stream of reactions to political space. And I'm just curious as to how like your relationship to that type of content and media is informing your work in any way, in every way.
Yeah. I guess like I start in the pandemic. I started rewatching Cowboy Bebop, and the piece of writing that I show, it was a piece of writing that I did like an imaginating like Faye and Spike to have a dialogue between them, uh, because I was thinking like these characters are broken, like the way they're presented in the world, they're lost and they live in a very kind of like intense universe in which they just have to like survive. And at the same time, Spike can keeps his facade of hero and his masculinity in the forefront, and that makes him incapable of just like asking for help or like truly like connecting with others. And I think like anime is pretty good at doing that. Anime is pretty good at like just like reflecting how good or bad we are at just like speaking with one another or connecting with one another. And they make it cheesy. They put it at the forefront, like the conversation. Sometimes they're very like long and very like out of place. Like that's not how we talk. But it just feels good, like to try to get wherever you want, like to try to say whatever you want to say, and waiting until you're able to say it, even though it sounds cheesy or even though it sounds stupid. And I think like I feel like that's like the piece that I did with my mother. I think like it's very much like that. Like let's try to sit and write and try to get onto whatever it is that we want to say. So yeah.
Well, I wanted to sort of say that I had no idea that you were working in such a collaborative way. That seems like a really big shift from the work I knew that you were making previously. And so I was curious, like, how that shift came about, and was also curious if teaching and being involved with the community here had any effect on you to make that decision.
Yeah. I mean, teaching is wonderful. I really enjoy it. And it's been like a great experience to be able to teach here. I met great artists by teaching, and just like the kind of conversations that happen are just like amazing overall. I think like the collaboration thing, even, I don't know. I just think like, so my partner, she works mostly through collaboration, and just seeing her has been a huge inspiration of like maybe the kind of work that can happen. And the other thing is just like, I feel like the kind of work that I'm interested in doing and could be very narcissistic in terms of like describing how I feel. Like I think art seems very narcissistic sometimes, and just like talking about how you feel, particularly in art, it feels even more narcissistic. That at a certain point, since the beginning almost of like thinking about heartbreak, I tried different ways of like getting out of myself. Like I tried last summer to do interviews with people, asking them like to try to come again to a similar language in which we could talk about this feeling. I tried another collaborative project that is still not out with Julia Dunn, that probably is going to come out in the summer. That is also through collaboration. And this project with my mom, it just happened because I was going to embroider and she told me like, oh, I can teach you. And then we were like, oh, you want to participate in this? And then you want to write in here? You want to learn how to like die? You know, like, and then it was just like, it just felt like an invitation, which is also related with teaching. Like, I feel like most people that are timid for like to do art, they just need support. They just need for you to tell them like that they can do it, and they could try to do different things. You know, like it felt a little bit like that with the project with my mother. She was self-conscious about doing it, and it was like, no, you can do it. If I can do it, you can do it. You know, like it's just a matter of like doing. So yeah, I haven't thought about it as much as I wish, especially because like I definitely want to continue doing it, but I have to find a way in which I can incorporate it properly. And yeah. There's a question from one of my students actually, Aaron. Did you already have those ideas of the delicateness and care you'd have to take with those t-shirt paintings beforehand, or did you gather those ideas through the process of making them? Yeah, I'm not like, I like to read a lot, but I'm not a good planner, because every time I plan and I start working on something, I get excited and I just I get distracted. So like, I think like the t-shirt paintings, they started as something else. And then I realized like, oh, this can be related with this. And then I start finding the connections and like altering them in a way that they would fit with the project. Yeah.
So Raúl, a segue to Brooke's comment, and I'm just gonna ask you more questions. You talk about a collective feeling of depression and anxiety, right? So it only makes sense to see you collaborating with more people in that body of work, right? So is that something that you thought about when you were developing all of this body of paintings?
With the paintings, no, because like, if I don't know, painting for me is very private. Like I like to do it alone. Just it has to do with the time that I spend doing them. But just like since the beginning, I thought that I needed to have more people, as I was mentioning. But maybe I don't know if it's gonna take the shape of like a painting or something else. Like for a second, it was the shape of like karaoke event that didn't happen, or like it could happen in very different ways.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily in the painting, but yeah.
And what makes you think that it's actually a collective feeling?
Yeah, honestly, I don't know. I've just heard people talking about how they feel, and I can imagine it's something that happens collectively. I don't know. Maybe it's just like the circles when I move. Maybe it's
Yeah,
just
no, I think you're right. I mean, I think our generation really talks about their therapy sessions. So
yeah,
that
exactly.
doesn't.
Yeah, or maybe also like family thing.
Hmm.
Like it could be like a lot of different things. But yeah.
Thanks.
Check there, Lula's in the picture now. Cool.
Well, are there any last questions or comments? Well, I think Lula coming into the frame is a good moment
Yeah.
to end on. So
Thank you a lot, everyone, for hearing my talk.
thank you, Raúl.